Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Book 2 episode. Today I have author Emily Carpenter joining me. Emily, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So Emily and I actually met it's almost like exactly a year ago, right?
I
Uh,
seem to remember. Yeah, I think it
yeah. So we met at an event called Noir at the Bar here in Birmingham, which just so happens to be where Emily's from.
yeah.
Granted, she's branched out into Georgia now, but we were able to meet there and got to also meet Robert McCammon, which was pretty awesome. I know you got to hang out with him for a little bit there.
I literally sat by him and I was like the whole time just like
It was like starstruck, right?
it's a true stuff.
And it's so funny because you kind of grew up like right down the road from him, and I live 20 minutes from him now, and it's like, who'd have thunk it, right?
No, I know. He seems very like low key, under the radar.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely not living up to his name.
No, he's not living a wild and crazy life of a
Yeah,
celebration.
he's very reclusive.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even think he does his own social media. So I mean, if that goes to show you anything, I'm pretty sure he's got a guy that does it for him. So
be bothered, you know.
yeah, he doesn't need it.
No.
He's got a big enough following. He's good.
That is so true. But I will say that I will always treasure that particular Noir at the Bar, because after I did my reading and I went and sat down, he said, "Good job." And I was like, oh, that's like, I mean, that's a once in a lifetime compliment, right?
Yeah, it's like I can die happy now. I'm good. I'm done with the author thing. We're done. I've got my books out. Robert McCammon said I did great.
I'm done. Yeah, that was a cool night.
It was a great night, and I'm so glad that John put that on. It's funny. So John and I actually met randomly. I was kind of like in between jobs. So my wife told me I should try substitute teaching because she did it right out of college.
Right.
And I go, okay, we'll try it. And just so happened to get a sub job at Calera Middle School, which is where John is a teacher at, and it just so happened to be his class. So John and I started chatting, and it turns out that we had a mutual love of Paul Tremblay. And so like we started, talking, and he was like, "Oh yeah, and I've also written some books." And I go, "Bring them on," and it's a small world.
Yes, and I love how that to me is the writing community, how you'll start with one person and make friends, and then you meet other people, and it's this sort of beautiful organic process in the writing community. I love it.
John, absolutely.
Yeah,
John's fantastic. So, but I want to know a little bit more about you. So we didn't get a whole ton of time to chat that night. We were too busy oogling and ogling of everybody else that was there, especially Mr. McCammon.
Yeah.
But I want to know a little bit about you. Growing up in Birmingham, which is where I'm from, and kind of how you branched out once you got to Auburn, going up to New York City, and then kind of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so I went to Auburn, really broke the mold there because my older sister and older brother were already there. So I was just the real rebel and went off to school with them. But I really, really loved it because, like we discussed before, I had grown up going to a really small private Christian school. So I felt my world was very small, and I was ready to branch out and really sort of experience the world. And I had a great time at Auburn, majored in speech communication, which is like radio, television, and film, which, in the 80s was not like a huge sort of major there, but I was really interested in working, maybe being a journalist. I didn't know what exactly. So I met the man who became my husband there, and we got married, and his job moved him up to New York City. And that's when I had the wonderful opportunity to work for CBS television, first in the advertising sales department, for primetime and late night. Got to see David Letterman and sit in the show, and that was really cool. And then I moved to their daytime drama department, which handled the taping of As the World Turns and Guiding Light, which were the two New York-based CBS soap operas. So that was an incredible experience for me. And basically what I did there was, they tape shows like several weeks ahead of time. And these soap operations, they're like well-oiled machinery. It's just amazing to see what goes on behind the scenes and how well they're run. But my job was to read the scripts ahead of time and summarize a week's script, send it off to the AP, and then they would publish it in your daily newspaper. You know, back in the day, we had these things called newspapers. Where you could open up your paper every day and see the television schedule for the day. And there would be like maybe a comic or two, and there would be like your horoscope or your bridge moves or whatever. And then there'd be like a little paragraph to say what happened what was going to happen in your soap that week in case you missed it, or I think it came out on Friday to kind of recap if you had missed the week, And so it's like, 5 or 6 sentences summarizing and saying like, Reba freaks out when Josh and Mindy don't show up to the ball or whatever. I use the term freaked out a lot. That was like a go-to verb.
I feel like there's a go-to verb in soap operas. Yeah. It's always freakouts.
Yeah. This is true. But I think what it did for me really was it really helped. So I read a ton, which, as we know, as writers, is always incredibly helpful. And I think by osmosis, I was really getting a lot of like really good training in story structure and dramatic, rising action and like character stuff and like snappy dialogue. I remember Guiding Light especially was really famous for some like very good romantic banter kind of dialogue. And so yeah, it was a really great experience, and worked there for a few years, and we ended up coming back to Atlanta where my husband's from, because we were really wanting to start a family and like have a house with a yard where our kids could run around and play. So that's kind of how I got that bug for writing, even though like as a kid, I'd always read voraciously and, felt like I wanted to write. I just didn't know how one went about doing that. And like back before the internet, it wasn't like I just assumed, oh, well, you have to be up in New York and know people up there. And, even when I went to New York, I was like, I don't know anyone in the publishing industry. I wouldn't know how to do this. So yeah, that was a later, kind of once the internet came out and it was like the process was demystified for all of us. Like, here's how you find the agents. Here's how you write the query letter. And yeah, so.
Here's how you write a book.
Yeah, like a million craft books, and here's a writer's conference. I just find it really heartening and fun how open and accessible the writing industry, the publishing industry is. I mean, not that it's not difficult to break into it, but they are looking for wonderful new books every day. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you even have publishers that send out, mean, I guess they send them out in emails too, but I'll see every now and then on social media how they're like reaching out for people to submit their books or submit short stories and stuff. So they're always looking for new stuff. It's not like they're just going to turn everybody away. I mean, if granted, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that just sits on desks for a while that they haven't had a chance to look at. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's you feel like there's a lot. It almost feels like the process, like like you were saying, it demystified, but it feels like, oh, it's been there all along, and now I know exactly. Why did it take so long to finally open the door for me? Now, when you were talking about the newspaper, what's that? I'm assuming it was also kind of like the TV guide, because you didn't always have the descriptions, but now you do. If you have like, I guess, satellite TV or whatever, you can hit info and you kind of see like the little blurb about it. So is that kind of similar to what you did?
Yeah, I mean, it really honestly was a six sentence paragraph of what had happened, what were the most important things that happened that week. And I mean, as anybody knows, that's called plot. And I didn't realize that at the time, but that was really teaching me how to hone in on what plot points were the most important and were moving the story forward. Because as everybody knows in soap operas, they go back and they repeat themselves and they talk about the same things over and over again. So it was really important to me to find out what plot points were moving the story forward. And I think, looking back on it, I can't believe what great training it was for me. Yeah.
So I was just curious. How long did you do, I guess, the soap opera deal? Were you up in New York for a while, or was that something you were kind of doing while you were looking for something else?
Yeah, we were up there for 3 years, and I think I was doing the soap opera thing for 2 years, which, was not that long. And, at that point, I was ready to get out of the city. But I wish I had stayed a little longer to learn a little more. But yeah, it was about 2 years.
I gotcha. So do you think it helped you write, I guess, your book description or your book synopsis? I know a lot of authors, that's like their least favorite thing to do, is write exactly what their book is about without spoiling anything.
I will say too, one of the other things that I did was read. So a lot of people would pitch treatments. A lot of writers would send their treatments to my boss's office about how they would write, like how they would structure the story for, say, Guiding Light if they were hired. It was just part of the hiring process. So I read a lot of treatments, and I also learned, like, this is how you write a synopsis or a treatment. It's, in present tense, and just some technical details about how to do it. So again, like I don't love going a synopsis, but I don't mind it that much. Yeah, because you kind of know it's going to be a little boring.
Yeah.
Because it's so removed. It's just like this plot point, this plot point, this plot point. And it's a necessary evil. But yeah, I had to read a lot of those as well.
I gotcha. Yeah. So I want to go back to your childhood. I want to know about your plagiarism as a youngster.
Yeah. When I think I was like 5 years old, and I wanted to write a book. And so I plagiarized The Pokey Little Puppy, which is a classic. I can't remember exactly what happened, and I will say I didn't finish the book, but I had like illustrations, and I was copying the page, and my mom put it together, like stapled it together for me. Yeah, I'm really proud, and I hope they don't haul me into jail for it.
I don't think they will over some stapled pages together. I think it'd be okay.
Yeah, I just want to make a book, so I just thought I'll just copy the Pokey Little Puppy.
Yeah. You could always make it like the Pokey Little Ducky or something, and you'd be completely fine.
I was just brazen. I didn't even care. I was just like, it's, whatever, you guys. It's the puppy.
You were determined. There you go. So you said you read a lot growing up, and so I guess who did you read a lot of, and then maybe who was maybe a big influence on your writing today, or maybe the writing you did before you got into Southern Gothic?
Yeah. What's really weird is, so my mom would take me to the Birmingham Public Library downtown all through the summer, and I would come out with these, stacks of books and read them all in the first 3 days. And she was like, "We're not going back for another 2 weeks, and you've already blown through all these books." And I will say, back then, I was not paying attention to the authors, right? I just read the book. I was just grabbing books off the shelf that looked good. And so I've had to go back and kind of go, oh, that was that author. And that was that, I didn't really follow authors. I more just sort of followed the books. But, growing up, when I was young, I read, all of Nancy Drew and the Bobbsey Twins and Trixie Belden, all those like series of books. And then there was, and still I'm not going to be able to remember the name of the author. I think it's Marjorie something, but there was this whole sort of spate of these teenage kind of young adult books written, I think they were written in the 50s, and they're very innocent and they're kind of romances, and there's a lot of those that I read. And I didn't so much, I read in elementary school, I read The Hobbit because the smartest boy in my 5th grade class was reading The Hobbit, and I felt very competitive about that for some reason. I'm a slightly competitive person, so I was like, well, I'm going to read The Hobbit then. And I adore Tolkien now, but I was like, there's no girls in this, and I cannot. I got very, very scared by Gollum and thought that was fantastic and scary, but there were no girls, and there were like a lot of dwarves singing.
Oh gosh.
I was like, no more dwarves singing around the campfire. But yes, and that I clearly did not appreciate the genius at the time.
I just love how you did it at a competition, not just because you wanted to read it.
Right, exactly. Huge C.S. Lewis fan. Chronicles of Narnia. Loved that. I got into one or more of Lois Duncan. Lois Duncan is like this YA horror. I Know What You Did Last Summer. She wrote that book. And the book that just haunted me was Down a Dark Hall. Oh my God, that just like grabbed me. It's like this gothic, it's very gothic, and it's very like a boarding school, and they have all these students that are being against their will possessed with the spirits of these great artists and being forced to create more art. And I just was like, that is wonderful. So, I could feel myself. And then, I think the first kind of real Southern Gothic thing I read was, I saw a production of Member of the Wedding, Carson McCullers, as a play. And then I got a hold of the play and the book. And felt a real sort of rush of kinship, of that sort of Southern coming of age, and that feeling of being bored, in the South and not having anything to do and not having cable TV and being kind of lost and wanting to belong, So that was kind of my introduction to Southern Gothic, was Carson McCullers.
I gotcha. So when would you say that you started writing seriously? I mean, clearly you wrote when you were a youngster, and I'm sure you wrote a little bit here and there growing up. But when were you like, okay, I think I'm ready to sit down and write my first novel?
Well, after I worked at CBS, I did sort of have a moment where I thought I would try to be a screenwriter. And that's when I got very serious about that and wrote several screenplays, but that did not turn out to be a fruitful avenue for me. It's really hard business to get into, as most writers know. So, I mean, I didn't start writing. I mean, really, honestly, I hit my 40th birthday and I was like, oh, this is going in one direction, this age thing, and I'm not going to get any younger. And I'm just sitting here waiting for somebody to give me permission to write a book, and that's ridiculous. And so really, after that birthday, it was a real milestone for me. I really hunkered down. I started writing, and I wrote a book that I could not get an agent with. And so I put that one away. I wrote a second book that I knew before I got to the end was also not the right book. And so then I wrote a third book and got an agent with that one.
Now, your first manuscript was a rom-com, is that right?
Yeah. It was like kind of a romance, kind of, they called it back then chick lit. And nobody wants to say that anymore, but that's what they were calling it back then. Yeah. So.
Well, I have to say, anytime I hear chiclet, I just think of like the little gum.
I mean, I'm not offended by it. It's a marketing way to identify it, but yeah, that's what it was.
Do they still use that term?
No.
I didn't think so.
No.
I didn't think I'd heard that in a while. I feel like everything is now just YA or something else.
There's YA and the rest of us.
Exactly. There's YA, and then every other genre, which there's like 20 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like if you can't categorize your novel, it's probably YA. Does it have a young character in it? It's YA. Okay, yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
So how has your writing process changed since that first manuscript? Do you have, like a set word count per day? Do you have a set page count? Do you have to have like a certain routine every morning to be able to sit down and write, or is it different every day?
Well, I will say with the first book, I was extremely disciplined. And, even for a while, I was getting up at 5 a.m. because I still had all 3 of my kids at home. And getting them off to school was an issue. But I've definitely, so I just put out my 5th book, and I feel like I have learned to give myself a little leeway and to kind of let the process happen the way it wants to happen. But I will say, like, writing that first draft, I do like to write every day, and I do like to hit a word count of 2,000 words a day. Just on that initial, the process that Stephen King calls paddling across the Atlantic in a bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that if you stop, you're suddenly going to be overwhelmed with the magnitude of what you're trying to do, and possibly get discouraged. So I do find that momentum of just going every day and trying to hold on to that initial excitement of your idea is really helpful to me. And then after that, I'm just kind of like, whatever. I mean, I don't really have a ritual, or I just, need coffee in the morning and occasionally some wine at night. And I'm good. And
nothing at all wrong with that.
Yeah. And I think too, what's weird, I have found that when I go on vacation, especially, so we go every summer and rent a house at a lake in Alabama. And I find that when I get there, I can write so many words. And I think it's just a function of being away from everyday responsibilities. And so I realized that's really important in my writing process, is to give myself those times of rest and either not write or just allow myself to write a ton and just do whatever,
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of where I'm at as far as right now as far as reading, but as far as writing too, is just that I can't turn my work brain off, and I can't turn my dad brain off to actually like sit down and do something.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned something the other day, and I commented on it on Facebook. You were talking about doing some kind of writer's retreat. Have you done writer's retreats before? I mean, I feel like I know a couple of authors that do. I know Michael J. Sullivan does one that's pretty big, that I think he has everybody like over to his house, and they do like a big writer's retreat there. But so A, is that something you've done before? And B, is that something that you really do intend to do in the future?
Yeah, I absolutely do intend to do it. It is one of my dreams to provide an environment for writers to be able to get away, even if it's just for a few days, to just get away and clear their minds from the responsibilities and the kind of the burdens that aren't a burden, but they hamper.
Feel like burdens.
Yeah. It always makes me laugh, these old writer quotes when they say, it is imperative that you have uninterrupted, and I'm like, are you out of your mind? There's just no such thing as that. Like, we have families, we have jobs, we have, it's a different world, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't lock ourselves away. So yes, that is a dream of mine. And I've been on a few writer retreats. None of them have been exactly what I'm envisioning providing. And so, I mean, I don't have all the details yet, but I'm working on something.
I gotcha. Yeah, and you've got a nice little writer shed, don't you? I think I've seen some pictures of it. I'm very jealous.
I've been very blessed. My husband and I built a new house a couple of years ago, and that was part of the plan, to just build this tiny little shed. It has a little bathroom and a tiny little kitchen, and has a little place to take a nap, because we all know we need those naps. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I've seen a few people with them. I know. There's a couple other authors I've seen that have them, but it always makes me a little jealous. I was like, oh my gosh, it'd be so awesome to have. I mean, I've got an office, like I can't complain, but just to be able to separate yourself from the house, and just have a super quiet place.
Yeah,
I told my wife, I was like, whenever we get to the age where our daughter, or shall I say kids, because I just know we're gonna at least have one more. When they're finally out of the house, and we decide, okay, we're gonna go to our dream house. We're gonna get our land, whatever. I'm like, I'm totally gonna have a writer shed on it.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I tried to get at our other house was, I tried to talk my husband into getting me an Airstream trailer to put in the backyard. He was like,
man, you went top of the line too, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. To look cool too. But yeah, that got nixed right away. He was like, I think that's against the neighborhood association.
The covenants.
Yeah.
Maybe so. Maybe so. Yeah, I definitely know I couldn't do it in my neighborhood. I mean,
Yeah.
granted, I'm the HOA president, so I don't know if I'd allow myself to do it. Oh yeah, I'm fancy. Yeah.
You're well, you're the president, which, as we know, means you can do whatever you want.
I mean, it does. I mean, now I will say this is a funny story. So I moved into this neighborhood. We were like the fourth family to move in, and they finally finished building it out earlier this year. And we didn't have a board or anything. So my wife decided she wanted to paint our front door. So we painted it. I was like, no questions asked. Well, we go to the first board meeting where I get elected president. I had to approve the fact that I painted my door. we're at that point.
That is silly, but yeah, God love you for being the president. I know my husband did that once too, and he was like, never again.
I know. I mean, luckily we're only in a neighborhood of like 36 homes, so it's not too bad. I mean, I haven't had anybody frustrated at me yet. Now I just know though if dues go up, it's going to come straight back to me. So
back.
Yeah, but I will say that the whole my wife's married to the president thing, that joke was pretty funny for about a week or two, and then it got kind of old. So things do wear off. I mean, the new car smell wears off.
Sure. But whatever. I'm impressed that you do that. That's a service to your community.
We'll see if I get reelected next year. Then we'll really know if I did anything good. Oh goodness. So okay, back to writing. So you started off rom-com, couldn't find an agent for it. That was your second book. Was it also a rom-com, or did you deviate anywhere?
It was too. And then I started to think maybe I'm not meant to write these. And right around that time was when I discovered Gillian Flynn. And it was right before Gone Girl came out. So she had her other two books, and I read them like in a matter of days. And I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. What she's doing, writing stories about women and relationships, but then also, suspense and really some stuff bordering on horror, but just some really dark stuff. It just sort of hit that sweet spot for me. And I was like, I really, really like what she's doing. And I had followed her as a film critic. I think it was Movie Line magazine back in the 90s or early 2000s. She was the film critic there. And that was a magazine I read, if I have that right. That was one of the magazines I read religiously because I'm a huge film buff as well. And so I was like, I just really, really like what she's doing. And then Gone Girl came out. And of course, I was just completely blown away. And, I thought, I don't know if I can write anything this beautifully written or as dark, but it's certainly in the general vicinity of what I want to try. So I thought, I want to write a mystery. I have no idea how to do this. Never done it before, but that's never stopped me. So one night I'm taking a bath and my husband's in bed, getting ready for bed. And I'm in the bathtub and I'm thinking okay, what's a great story? What's a great hook? And I thought about, the birthdays that we all celebrate. And as women, especially, some of these birthdays can be very momentous or daunting for no reason. Like, when you turn 30 and you have this existential crisis about why haven't I accomplished all the things? And then you turn 40 and you're like, whoops, every sort of milestone decade birthday, we kind of freak out. And so I had the
you talking about the same milestones where guys were like, that's just another day.
It's so crazy. We put this pressure on ourselves, like on those birthdays, like you are supposed to accomplish something by that birthday. But I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if there was a young woman who's about to turn 30 and she had a real reason to be afraid of turning 30, instead of just like getting wrinkles or whatever. And so I came up with the idea that, she has just discovered that her mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother all either died or disappeared, or something mysterious happened to them on their 30th birthday. So she feels this family curse is looming over her head, and she has 2 weeks till her birthday to try to unravel the mystery of what happened to these women in her family. So I was very excited about that idea. I thought it was really good hook, and like really kind of could be spooky and Southern Gothic and all the things that I felt like I could write. So I jumped out of the bathtub and wrapped myself in the towel, and I run into the bedroom and I pitched the idea to my husband, and he's like, "Oh, that is really good. You should write that story." And he said, "So what happened to those women?" And I was like, "I don't know. I don't have any idea. I'll come up with that later." So that's kind of the how I wrote my first book that ended up getting me an agent and getting published.
Okay. Yeah, because and that's kind of is a great start or lead up into my next question. So I know Reviving the Hawthorn Sisters, which is your newest novel, is a follow-up to your Southern Gothic debut, Burying the Honeysuckle Girls. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about the latter before we get into the former?
So Honeysuckle Girls first. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the story. Is my main character Althea is about to turn 30, and she's like, her family she's had troubles with drugs and alcohol. She's been in and out of rehab and rather unstable, but she's a fighter, and her brother, who's running for Attorney General of the state of Alabama, is somewhat desperate to get her under control and to make sure she doesn't do anything to ruin his political chances. And so she sort of takes this journey through Alabama, investigating what happened to her mother and her grandmother, and ultimately great-grandmother. And it's a dual timelines, and I'm telling the story of the great-grandmother, who is a woman named Jen in the mountains of North Alabama in the 1930s, and what happened to her, and how it kind of was the catalyst that started like ultimately all this tragedy in the family. So yeah, that's the first book.
And then a little bit about Reviving. So what, first, before we get into it, what made you decide to write a follow-up novel to that? Was there like little threads that you just couldn't quite end in the first book, or did you know that you wanted to write kind of a follow-up to it?
Well, I'd always wanted to do that, and I always have this sort of like a bucket list thing for me is to write a series. I would love to do that. The idea is really appealing to me. So I always did have an idea that I would follow one of the characters in Honeysuckle Girls, a character named Dove Jared, who figures into both the 1930s timeline and the present day timeline. She's the wife of a faith healer, and she's a very interesting woman, perhaps a little bit of a liar and a con woman, and but she sort of causes a lot of the action. I always thought she would be an incredible character to follow up on, but I never had any plans. And then fast forward, after my fourth book, which was a very kind of straightforward adventure thriller, I thought, it'd be really fun to get back to the sort of Alabama Southern Gothic roots. So I spoke with my editor, at my publisher and just said, how would you feel if I did this kind of follow-up book? It's not technically a sequel, so the books can be read on their own, but how would you feel, if I wrote this story about Dove Jared and how she came to be who she was and her family? So that is Reviving the Hawthorn Sisters, is about Dove's life, how she escaped a psychiatric facility where she was born in the 30s. And she was, 13 years old, a kid on the streets in the Depression, making ends meet and possibly getting into some cons and grifts and some illegal activity. And she winds up being part of a duo called the Hawthorn Sisters, who are sort of on the entertainment, faith healing, tent evangelist circuit in the 30s in Alabama.
Nothing wrong with escaping a psychiatric ward in Alabama, right? Yeah. we don't have several of those or anything. We definitely don't have one that's on a campus of a major university here.
Well, so, that's the one I modeled my house after. So, and I may have snuck into that one, but
that's neither here nor there, right?
Very creepy.
See, I went to Alabama. My first semester was when I was a freshman, and I'd always pass it going to my dorm, and this was like, you kind of have that Halloween vibe that every time you're gonna drive by it, you're gonna see just a bunch of people in white jumpsuits, like just standing out.
Yeah, you just expect to see a ghost there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So in between these two novels, you wrote some thriller type novels. So was that kind of based on your love for Gillian Flynn, or was that just something that after you wrote, Burying the Honeysuckle Girls, you're like, maybe I want to go like deep dive straight into just like thriller instead of more of the Southern Gothic, or is it just this was the book that was, in the back of your mind and that's what I wanted to do?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't very calculated about my brand or, what book was probably the smartest book. I just had ideas and was like, this is what I want to write. And so I went about it in a very instinctive way. And I have realized as, I've gotten further into this business that authors have to be thoughtful, they don't have to be thoughtful about what book is next, but I think it can be, they can end up shooting themselves in the foot if they don't pay attention to sort of, I don't know, what people expect from them. And there's a balance there. But yeah, I just kind of went with my gut and wrote the thing I wanted to write. And so it has kind of resulted in that I have some things that are just super Southern Gothic, kind of dripping with that like Southern feeling. And then I have some other books that are just a little more straight up thrillers. So yeah,
and you give something for everybody. I mean, at least you're not, you're not like the classic rock bands that have 5 or 6 albums and then just all of a sudden, I think we're gonna do a pop album, and it's just like,
no,
what, and then just totally turn off half your fan base.
But, I mean, on the other hand, you can see how artists get tired of doing the same thing over and over again. And so, yeah, it is taking a chance to try to branch out and fulfill that creative need in them. And I just think you probably have to do it carefully. And to me, that's where the guidance of my agent has been really invaluable, because she's always kind of the clear-eyed voice of wisdom who can say, well, let's talk about, like, let's step outside your excitement of the story and talk about how this book is going to be perceived on the market, which is never my first thought.
Yeah, it's not something you generally have to worry about. That's why you have agent.
Right. And I mean,
It's like, hey, I want to write this thing. Don't write that. Okay, what about this? That'll work.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
show that other idea.
I mean, that's what you want, though, is somebody looking out for your best interest and who has kind of a understanding of the marketplace.
Yeah, and you don't want to get blindsided putting something out there and then it just totally doesn't get perceived in the way you intended it. I've always wondered, and with a ton of authors that want to kind of branch out. Have you ever thought about writing maybe like a novella or something that's maybe in a different genre that you're like, all right, let's just see how this goes, and then maybe like, okay, if that gets perceived well, maybe I can look at doing that novel that I thought about, X amount of years ago.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've still had some interest in writing romance, which I'm doing a little on the side. I'm not sure where it's going to end up. I also started a novel that's I'm dying to write, like straight up horror. Um,
Bring it on.
Love it. And you know what I love? Like in the past year, horror has just gotten such a boost. Speaking of Paul Tremblay, I had read recently, is it Cabin at the End of the World?
Mm-hmm.
That scared the ever living, and I don't get scared by anything. Like nothing scares me. And that book, I tell you, that guy, man.
Yeah, he's good. I would recommend if you want a really good book, and I recommend this to everybody that needs a good horror book, but The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones.
I'm listening to it right now.
Oh my gosh, that is probably the only book that has legit scared me, and since I've really gotten into horror, yeah.
Elk, man.
Yeah, and I've had him on twice this year to chat with him. I was trying to get him on for the con in January, but unfortunately he can't make it. But yeah, I love his books. They're so great. But that one straight up was like, all right, I can't turn the lights on.
And it is just a slow burn. And I remember, well, this will be a spoiler. At some point, one of the characters says, well, this death of this other person is not related to and I'm like, it's related.
Yeah, it's like being at the movies and screaming at the person to run or close the door.
Yeah. And so my husband is a hunter from way back and a very responsible. He's a conservationist too. He's a responsible hunter. I'd like to make that caveat, but I told him about this book and he was like, oh my gosh. He thought it was, it's just got such a great hook. So
right, exactly. Oh God, now you wanting to read your horror book. So yeah, I want to be first in line for that, by the way. So
good. How it works. It is, it's the industry makes you want to write the same thing over and over again. I will say that. And that's okay. That's the way, that's the business side of it. But yeah, I'd like to branch out. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know there's one that's getting a lot of early publicity. It comes out next year. It's called The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I think that's how you say her name. But like Joe Hill's like throwing all kinds of stuff about it. And there's like a ton of friggin' like big names in horror that are like, you got to get this book kind of thing. So I'm looking forward to it. So I feel like horror is not going anywhere. So I feel like you're getting in at a good time.
I think it's growing. I really do. And I think, Mexican Gothic was a huge help to almost sort of mainstream it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and Tor Nightfire, which is their like horror lineup now. They're part. I think they've got another one from Sylvia coming out next year. I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but yes, I mean, if you get it out there and you're like looking for somewhere to shop at, that might be a good place to start. I know, I think they've got a few things that they're publishing out next year, but I think they really just kind of started this year doing a couple of like short audio collections.
Oh, cool.
So I don't know if you've got Google Play, but they have, I think it's like they're like 20 or 30 hours, but it's like 35 short stories from like Tremblay and Chuck Wendig and Brian Evanson. I mean, there's several authors in there. So I would look at those too, because that could be like, okay, maybe this is where I need to be looking or something. But I recommend those. Those are phenomenal. And I think you can get them in single volumes too, or you can get the whole series in one, and it's all free. So which is also
that's
pretty
amazing.
nice.
Yeah,
free fiction's great.
I love free fiction. I'll check it out.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's called like by the fire, by the bonfire, or something like that. But yeah, it's Tor Nightfire on Google Play.
Love it.
But that is interesting. Yeah, I'm always interested to see if others are going to branch out. Generally who I have on here is generally like fantasy authors, so they kind of stay with their niche, or they maybe venture into science fiction or something, or you just have your thriller types that just stick with thrillers. So that's kind of neat that you've got your Southern Gothic, you got your thriller. I'm like, I think I'm gonna do horror. Now, if you said you were gonna try fantasy, I've been like, wait, hold on.
I could not write fantasy. I know, so my husband and my son are both humongous Wheel of Time fans, and have read the Robert Jordan series like a million times. And I have read enough of those books and heard them talk about them that I know I can't write fantasy. I'm not. I can accept. Yeah, I mean, let's harken back to my reaction to The Hobbit. That is, I just admire those writers very much. But I do like a little magical realism, I will say. But that's different than fantasy.
I'm just looking for 2022. Emily Carpenter's fantasy debut. I just know it's going to happen. You're going to get a wild itch one day, and you're like, here it comes.
I mean, that's the thing about getting older, right? You learn about what you definitely cannot do.
Or what you definitely do not like.
So.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, last question I got for you. If you've got some in your mind, great. If you don't, that's fine too. I usually stump people with this one. But is there anything that you've read outside of like A Cabin at the End of the World, or Only Good Indians, since we've talked about? Is there anything you've read this year, or are there any authors you think of that maybe need some more readership, or that you would just recommend?
I don't know that this guy. So I have recently discovered, let me make sure I get his name right. Laird Barron. Yeah, you know him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he actually follows me on Twitter. I know. Sometimes you just get lucky.
Yeah, that's really good. So I, in quick succession, read okay, it's not Laird Barron.
Would that be? I was about to say, would that be his crime fiction? I know he just released like a trilogy.
I made a mistake. It's not Laird Barron. It's Laird Hunt.
I still think I know who you're talking about. If you say a title of a book, I'll know.
Okay, so the first one I read was In the House at the Dark of the Woods.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
Which is like literally, it was mesmerizing to me, even though I didn't understand like a third of that book. Like I was like, what is happening? Yet I can't. I can't put this down. It was like the weirdest, scariest fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
Was just, and then I read Never Home after that, the one about the Civil War, the woman who dresses up as a soldier in the Civil War. And that was probably my favorite, like just haunting and beautifully written. And it's one of those books I can't quit thinking about. And he's about to come out with Zori, which I have pre-ordered. And a couple of friends of mine and I were going to do a virtual book club of it because we're obsessed with his books. They're just so, I just feel like that guy just goes and sits in his writing room and just writes exactly what he wants to write. And it's just mesmerizing and strange and occupies this. So I don't think, like, in terms of commercial, he's just not really all that commercial. So I just feel like maybe, you know, I mean, it's not going to be a Reese Book of the Month Club pick.
I'm not about that life. It's fine. I don't have to read everything on Oprah's list for the year. It's fine.
Right, but it's just I don't know how to describe it. It's just you read it and you are absolutely transported to this world he's created. So I'm really looking forward to that. And trying to think, you know, in lockdown, and this is kind of the polar opposite. In lockdown, I have been reading a lot of romance, just because it's just lighthearted and fun.
You're trying to get that romance itch, I know.
Yes, and trying to learn about, like, so I've read a lot of Regency romance by Tessa Dare and Sarah MacLean, who are both really big names in romance. And yeah, so yeah.
I know how you feel. I mean, my wife was like, as soon as lockdown hit and she was at home, that she was loading up her Kindle with romance novels. So she'd be on one end of the couch reading romance, and I'd be on the other end either reading horror or fantasy or something. So yeah, it's comforting and it's easy read, especially if we go down to the lake. She can sit by the pool and just devour one. So
yeah, and I find, interestingly, two sides of the same coin: romance and horror. But they can both really distract you.
Romantic horror. There you go. Go ahead and jot that down.
I will thank you for that in my acknowledgments of my romantic horror.
See, there's always an answer for everything.
Oh yeah. New genre for readers to enjoy.
Oh gosh, that'd be really interesting. I'd be curious how that would go. I guess it would be kind of like a, you know, it'd be, I wouldn't say a 50 Shades feel, but then it would just be like graphic murder. I don't know.
Well, I mean, if you recall in all the, you know, Friday the 13th movies, what happens to the kids who get up to, you know, those sexual,
get up to no good?
They get killed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you know, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, I guess some of those were not quite getting up to no good, but you know.
Yeah. I think there's a way to make it work.
There is. We'll talk about it. I'll help pitch ideas.
I'll let you know.
Fantastic. Well, Emily, it has been a pleasure having you on today. And everybody that's listening in, Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters is just come out, so definitely make sure to go grab yourself a copy. And if you haven't read Burying the Honeysuckle Girls, it has been out, and it's a nice little 1-2 punch. If you want to, get you a couple of books to read in the continuing lockdown. And she's also got. What's that?
You're looking for holiday gifts, contact your local indie bookstore and get them to order it or take it off the shelf.
There you go. Well, Emily, I guess we'll be seeing each other pretty shortly at the end of January. Still don't have a name for it, but we're doing another convention at the end of January.
So excited.
I have like 70 people signed up. I don't know how I'm going to do it. But as of right now, you are potentially on a panel with CJ Tudor. I don't know if you've ever read anything by CJ Tudor. John Mars is potentially coming on. I'm going to have Andy Davidson, who you met at the Noir event.
Yeah.
Potentially Josh Mallerman. Still waiting to hear back if he wants to pop on. The author of Bird Box for y'all that don't know. And a couple more. So I think we're actually going to like jam pack y'all's panel. So it's going to be pretty sweet. So hey, and we'll call it the horror thriller panel, so you can talk about horror, and you can we'll continue this romantic horror idea.
Yes, I love it. Maybe I can gain some pointers. Those are some pretty heavy hitters.
Fantastic. Well, Emily, just thank you so much for taking the time to come chat with me, and we'll see each other soon.
Thank you, David. I'm
absolutely.
See you soon.